All right. Looks like we're live. Today is January 30th, and this is our first strategy and planning, perhaps goal setting meeting for what we want to do in 2020. This meeting is usually our design and user experience issue, so we're going to try and keep our conversation limited to those topics today. But before we get started on big picture strategy stuff, I think it would be great if we could get everybody here to say who you are, maybe why you decided to come to this meeting, and if you have any thoughts on our what our goals should be for 2020, or just in general our strategy for handling design and user experience issues. So Tim, do you want to start?
Can you quickly say something about what design and UX means?
Sure, that's great. So we use design in Backdrop usually to talk about the design of the product itself. So that would be like the front end theme, the back end theme, and how those appear visually to people looking at the product. Sometimes there are also elements of I am designing a website for a client and I'm facing this problem. So there might be a technical problem that's related to design that isn't necessarily in need of designers' feedback, but we want to hear from designers what the problem is so that we can solve it. UX is an abbreviation for usability, and what that often means is how easy is it for a person to complete a task. So sometimes that is something like navigating a menu system on the front end of the website, and that could be anyone who's using the website needs to use the website more easily. Sometimes it can be a super high level administrative task, like, I'm having trouble deleting the messages in the Watchdog database log when, in fact, I want to filter. So there could be things like that that trip people up that we want to make intuitive so that you have to consult the documentation less often on how to do something, and also so that you make fewer mistakes. So the less amount of time administrators can spend clicking around, especially high-level, perhaps expensive administrators can spend clicking around the site, the more money that's going to end up saving people who are owning the websites, who hired those people to do those things. And the less work it takes somebody on the front end to achieve their goal, the happier they're going to be with the product. So whether that is somebody who's buying something from a website that you offer, they're going to be more inclined to return to your website and buy it again, or they're going to have a better experience buying it. Maybe they'll buy more things. Or if it's, you as a content creator creating content, we don't want you to get frustrated using the system to write a blog post. So usability is basically how easy it is to use, and that can be any audience. Design and usability have a lot of overlap because sometimes we like to make things really pretty, and in the process, it makes them less usable. A great example for that is something like, I decided that I wanted to make all of the buttons gradient color of grays. But in the process of doing that, the meaning of what each color might be lost. So is dark gray mean active and white means disabled, or does white mean something different? So there's a whole bunch of elements of patterns that often get repeated. And sometimes we need help with designing those patterns so that we can get a consistent experience all the way across the administrative side of things, and sometimes also on the front end too. So in general, Backdrop is a fork of Drupal. Drupal has a reputation of not being terribly usable. We're trying to improve that by thinking about the design decisions we make and the usability decisions we make when we're working on software. We are trying to keep in mind that right now our primary audience is people who are coming from Drupal. So trying not to change too much of what people already know. We want to keep the experience that's familiar to them, but make it less confusing or faster for them to achieve the things that they're already familiar with doing. That said, we're also trying to compete against WordPress, which people love and has generally experienced for people experience it as being very usable software. That's varies obviously by the person you ask. And so we also want to make sure that Backdrop is intuitive to people that have never seen Backdrop before. And if many people have had experience with WordPress because it tends to power a third of the internet. So if people have seen WordPress before, some of the patterns that are there are good to apply to different systems. So we have adopted a lot of things like terminology from WordPress so that people will feel familiar with the system immediately. So in terms of this meeting, we could really go any way with it we want, but I would like to talk about how we plan on improving both the design to make Backdrop a more attractive tool to designers and the user experience to make it a more attractive tool to people who are using it in a way that is useful for everyone. So like how do we make a system where we can get feedback from the people we need to have feedback from and end up with tasks to give to developers who need to develop them? So how do we make that process as seamless as possible so that we can achieve the goals we're trying to set up? All right, Tim, let's start with an introduction of who you are, why you're here, and if you have any thoughts on what we should be doing in 2020.
I'm Tim Erickson. I'm with Triplo. I have been pretty much coming to as many of these meetings, of the Backdrop meetings, as I can for the last year. So I've been a regular participant in the UX meetings. I feel a little bit at times like it's that I'm very interested in the outreach. I don't know. The UX one is the one the meeting I'm the most ambivalent about, and I think for reasons that I think we should talk about today. Like it's because I'm not ambivalent about it, right? I care a lot about the design and UX, but I don't know. There's something about these meetings that's a little bit, I don't know, feels less focused, and I'm not like, I think it's a little more scattered, and so that might be a good goal, is to think about how we're using these meetings and make them more relevant. I think on the whole, UX, one of the things that I think we're pretty proud of internally is the attention we put on little tiny UX improvements. And I wonder sometimes if sometimes we get too focused on like the hot little thing that somebody's excited about and not the bigger picture. So I think we have, you referenced the logs messages issue vaguely already. And that's a great issue where there's suddenly a lot of people that have opinions about that, and it's divided. And one of the things I think we need to think about is like, how do these, like my sense in the community so far has been that if there's division, then there's no decision. That there isn't a way to resolve a lack of consensus. And like this particular issue right now, there doesn't seem to be consensus. So does that mean that everybody just goes away? Can we try again in 6 months or
yeah,
you know?
We have a general process here that I don't think we've used before, is where if you have an issue that reaches a stalemate, we should escalate that to the PMC and let them make sort of an executive call on where we should go with it. That executive call might be do nothing. It might be match Drupal 7. It might be do something completely different, like maybe completely redesign that page. But I think that if it gets to a point where we have people in our community who are starting to get, bonk heads without making any progress, we don't want those people to start feeling burnout from that process of feeling like I can't get my point across, or I can't convince anyone to see my perspective, because sometimes people just aren't going to see the same perspective. And so having that issue sort of say, stop, we're going to escalate this to the PMC, close comments on it, have the PMC reach a decision, open a new issue, say this is what they decide. That's good. And if people still want to come in and state their opinions on the new issue, that's fine. And we can leave that open for future discussion, not like we can change, we can do something. If it doesn't work, we can do something else. So I think just being able to say, right now we're going to do this, and if it doesn't work, we'll do that, I think is sort of a good path forward, even if it doesn't make everybody happy immediately. And if people try the new thing and they don't like it, we can say, we were wrong, we'll try something else. So maybe that's a good issue where we can do that. I haven't read through that issue recently. But if you see something like that, maybe we should create a label that says something like needs PMC review or escalate or something, and then we can figure out what the process is for that. I don't think we've used it before on a, like, especially a design usability issue, which can have lots of different opinions. But we should work on that. So maybe that's something for a good goal for 2020 is to figure out, especially when you have different opinions on design, how do we handle the, kick it to someone who can make an authoritative decision.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I would currently recommend to somebody in this situation is to bring it to this meeting, right? If it's getting bogged down in the issue queue, sometimes just bringing it to the design meeting and talking about it can break that logjam and like make people see, oh, okay, I get it. This is what we do have in common, and this is what we can do. I don't know if that's the right process because there might be 10 people involved in the discussion in GitHub, and then once it comes to the call, there might only be 4 of us that sort of make a decision. I think that's what often happens, and it's usually, if that does happen, I think it's helpful. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's also hard though, because it does sort of limit who can participate in that decision to geography based on like where you are in the world. If you're asleep right now, it's not going to work. And also some people have jobs where they can't get away in the middle of a work day to come and jump in on it. And so I wouldn't want to diminish those people's ability to weigh in on it. I also feel like it might be good to just have, like, rather than continue with a discussion that can get heated, have somebody that we can just say like X person is making a decision, or these 2 people will come to their own consensus and make a decision, and have some process where we can kind of say, okay, everybody take a deep breath, it's out of your hands, and then push it to someone else.
Right. So I was going to, both of those points are accurate. Last thing I want to say is in terms of design, one of the things I've been very focused on is like the design of the product, like backdrop itself. Other than the behind the scenes, it's pretty obvious what that means. But from the front end, what does that mean? In that most people, or a lot of people who are using backdrop, are writing their own themes and creating their own design. So design right now means basis, right? What does backdrop look like out of the box? I have been, and we talked about this in one of the calls that you weren't on, and it also wasn't recorded a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about like what all a non-themer, somebody who's not actually writing CSS, can do to the product to affect how it looks, sort of out of the box through the UI. And I think one of the big questions I have overall, I don't know if that's specific to this meeting, is to what extent is that the right use case for backdrop, right? To what extent do we expect somebody to be able to customize their theme? Or, do we want backdrop to be something that somebody can download and through the UI customize to make attractive? And frankly, I don't think we're, in terms of goal setting, I think that's a big weakness right now. If you don't have any CSS skills and you just want to kind of modify your site and make it look good, basis, and it's getting better, and that's one of the things I've been working on, is trying to make basis more flexible, and also been working on the contrib team to do that. But sometimes I wonder if that's sort of a shared goal in the community, or whether or not there's kind of an assumption that people are going to create their own theme. And so that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to get more people's opinions on that, because to me, I think it's really important that it be easy for somebody new to backdrop to get a finished product. And I think that's the only way we're going to get a bunch of new adopters, is if people who know HTML and CSS can come in and be like, oh, I made a theme. But we are coming from Drupal, where it is rather rare that a Drupal site ships without like a heavily customized theme, and you get a bunch of people with very specialized skills in there doing that. And I don't know where our audience is. Like, we're shooting for a lower audience, but that doesn't mean we're there yet. And it's also kind of a chicken and egg thing, where like, do we need to make it easier before we get people who want it to be easier? Or yeah, so I would love to hear what other people, I have a feeling most of the people who are using Backdrop now are sort of in the, I came from Drupal and I already know how to do this camp. But to me, it's important that we go downstream to grow our audience, but I don't know if that's where we need to be aiming or not. Do you have any other thoughts, Tim, or should we move on?
I think we should move on.
Okay. Jason, do you want to tell everybody who you are and why you're here and what you think? Uh-oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted? No?
Yes, I was muted.
Okay.
So I'm Jason. I'm going to look at my laptop where my camera is and not my screen. So I won't be able to see you if you're waving at me. I'm not really here because I'm hoping to make big sweeping changes for design and UX for Backdrop, but I am interested in all of that happens. I come from Drupal I've been like a Drupal user and developer for 16 years, and I've been moving to be more active in Backdrop. I've been doing stuff lightly for the last couple of years, mostly because I've got a lot on my plate, and so I have a hard time just jumping in. But I see, as far as I'm not sure exactly where to go with this, but I see there's being as two sides for design, and that's like, one is like, we're talking about WordPress, where WordPress is, they've got a billion themes, and everybody says, well, if you don't like it, just change it. If a plugin you use doesn't work with it, just change your theme. Well, that kind of is a bad idea if that's your branding. But that's where they come from. And then on Drupal side, it's like you were saying, it's like, just create your own theme, customize everything. You know, maybe you start with something out of the box, but most people start with something like Zen or Omega or something like that and just create their own thing. So I see Backdrop has basically neither. They don't really have a good user experience for building your own. You know, unless it's a developer who's very skilled, like Peter can do quite well with that. And there's other people that can as well, but and then the other side is that we really don't have a lot of themes. You know, there's like 10 contributed themes, and I don't think any one of them's been updated in the last year or two to, you know, for layouts or whatever the current stuff is. So I see Backdrop lacking in both of those areas, where it's like, if we want to get people to come in, we need to have some of both. The other thing that I would like to see personally, because of my target is the small, the micro business owner. That's my target audience. You know, somebody who has a business with, you know, 10 or fewer employees or whatever. So it's really, and their business isn't developing websites. Their business is selling widgets or whatever, you know, welding or fixing cars or a storefront. So they don't know much, if anything, usually about website development. So them coming in and having to say, here, build your own theme is really a bad idea. It's like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go to WordPress where I've got a billion themes and I can pick and choose. But I think, so my point is that there needs to be a medium where somebody can pick a theme and then customize it without requiring them to be a developer. And I think that is really lacking. Tools like whatever it's called, Elementor or something like that, where, you know, you can kind of go to your node or your page and just kind of like drag and drop and click and say, okay, now I've got what I want. And it's really simple. Now Backdrop's doing a lot to get there, but I don't think it's there yet. So I don't know. I think there's probably 3 areas there, but I'm really like looking at how, if we want people to adopt it, what do we need in place so that they can and will adopt it? And if we've got people that say, oh, well, you don't have a billion themes, so I'm not going to use it, well, then that's something we need to work on. But if it's the other way, the other side, it's like, I can't develop it, so I'm not going to use it, then that's where we need to be. Anyway, that's kind of like my thought process, where my focuses are, where I'm thinking. But I'm also not really a developer. I'm not, I mean, a themer. I'm not a designer. I try to develop UIs that are not terrible, like I see most JavaScript front ends look like. But that's about as far as I go. So anyway, enough ranting.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Joseph, do you want to weigh in on who you are and why you're here and what you want to see in 2020?
I don't really have much to say, I guess. I usually just kind of come to these meetings to listen to other people, but I'm I'm more of a backend developer. I've been doing Drupal for, I guess it's like 5 years now. And I don't know, I guess rest a little bit because I'm not a themer. I have a themer to work with. So I basically have to do everything when I'm working on our clients' stuff. And I don't know, just making tools to make theming easier is usually what I work on.
Great.
Can you say how you think we're doing in terms of the design and UX?
I think we're doing all right. The layout stuff helps a lot. It's much better than it was in Drupal 7. And some of the contributed modules that I've worked on, in the core modules, like the color module and configurable block styles. And then I started working on a abortive display suite as well. So I think we're doing well on that front.
That's great. I saw your abortive display suite and I got really excited.
It needs a lot of work still.
It's going to be tricky. So that's pretty different. Okay, I guess I'll go next. I am Jen Lampton. I am here because though I care about design, I don't really understand it. My brain is very logic driven. And if you can explain to me that like things on the left need to be 10 pixels from things on the right, I understand that. But beyond that, I can't really tell if something's pretty or not. I do, however, care a lot about usability. I spent a lot of time teaching people how to use Drupal and watching where they struggled. And so I do tend to be very focused on a lot of those little things that tend to trip people up and try and want to fix those. The bigger picture, though, is hard for me also in usability experience, like asking, how does it feel to use backdrop without a specific, like, does this button make more sense on the left or on the right, is hard for me to grapple with. And so I'd like to see some more of those kind of bigger picture questions answered in 2020. I think we've been doing a pretty good job on sort of a scratch your own itch, find a usability problem and fix it thing, and adding a ton of those. But I'd love to see sort of a more holistic view of like, what is it that you find frustrating versus what is it that you find easy, and can we make more of the things easy than frustrating? In particular, I would like to see more usability studies done where we get a pool of a certain number of people. It doesn't have to be that many, like maybe 5 to 10, something like that, and show them a particular interface and give them a particular task and see if they can achieve it, and maybe even record and/or live stream those so that we have them on record for the future. And if there are a bunch of things that trip up a whole bunch of people, like, I don't know, something's layout seems really intuitive to us, but we give it to them and they get confused, that might highlight some stuff that we're not seeing. It also might help us change our priorities in terms of what we're working on, which I think could be useful. So that my goal for 2020 would be more studies. Tim, there was something you set up last year with a forum post or a specific forum topic that's like, here's a usability study, where we could post like how, do this particular task and let us know how it was. I think that's fantastic. I would like to see more of that. I also would like to see something where we reach out to people that aren't in the backdrop community. So if you could be like, hey, ask your neighbor for 5 minutes. I don't know how many neighbors we can find that'll do it, but something like that, where we can get a different perspective and have, a good script for how to do that. That's, only going to be 5 or 10 minutes of their time and still going to be really valuable for us. I'm also open to changing what we do with this meeting. I set up these agendas initially based on like what we used to do in bad camp meetings, which was very sort of loose and consensus driven. And I don't have any particular attachment to the way that they're done. So if we don't want to use this time for running through a list of issues and would rather talk about, I don't know, how to do a study, or if we need to bring in an external designer for half an hour and just show them stuff and get their feedback. And we, that's something we could do on a video or a live stream too. And that might be really interesting to people in our community. I'm totally happy to do that. So I do want to reserve this time for design and usability, but what we do with that could be anything. So if anyone has any good ideas about how we could be better using this time to improve the user experience with Backdrop or the initial impression, I am all ears to that.
Well, I think I like your comments about usability studies. The usability studies we put up in the forum right now are sort of focused on community tasks, but my idea at the time was that we could try the same thing with the actual product, where we just ask people to sort of self-test it and report back. I think usability is something that can be super complicated in studies and ambitious, or they can be, fairly simple. And we get hung up on the more complicated scenarios. Like, to me, the very minimal is like what we did in the forum, where we just write some tasks and ask people to report back. But the next step up from that would be if we wrote some scenarios, what we think are the most common and important. And heck, we could invite a friend to come in on one of these meetings and just record them, running through that scenario, and watch them try and get, accomplish the things we did. It would be recorded, and then we could talk about it afterwards. And that would, that doesn't, it's writing the scenarios and then finding the person to do it. Those are the two big tasks.
Yeah.
And setting aside the time. So it's not that hard to do, but it's, we have so many ideas of things we'd like to do that aren't, and a lot of them aren't that hard. So it's a matter of prioritizing.
Yeah. I think when it comes to Backdrop, the product, we've got a pretty sweet setup already where we could create a pull request and test give people the sandbox site and say, try it now. And then if it doesn't work, change it and say, try it now. Like, we already have that infrastructure set up where all we need to do is record somebody using it and we could get the feedback we need. So that, in a sense, we didn't have when I was working on this with Drupal, and trying to just set up places where people could do the testing was hard. There are, of course, a lot, you mentioned there's a lot more that we could be doing in a usability test, but I think in terms of just doing the testing, like starting with what we have in the forum is great. Adding a 5-minute clip we could do in this meeting would be great. Adding, we just need to set aside some time to be like, okay, what is the big picture question we want to ask? And then what is a 5-minute task that would answer whether that is achievable or not with the current interfaces. So I think that would be great. And I think some of these things might be testing new features. Like, I would love to put more people in front of the layout builder. That was something that really wowed everybody in a live demo that I did last year. And watching me do it, they were like, oh, that's fantastic. But I sometimes wonder if somebody who isn't familiar with it would be able to achieve the same thing as quickly. Because that's one of my favorite features and I want to make sure everybody's using it. And then layouts in general is tricky. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that's new to Backdrop that I know hasn't been studied because it wasn't studied in Drupal, that I would love to get in front of people. File management, maybe, since that's something that was difficult in Drupal, could be something. But yeah, so maybe we should have a place where we can collect things we want to test. I don't know where we should do that. Maybe we should just have a running list in an issue somewhere that's like, these are the things we'd like to get feedback on, and anyone who's working on anything can add something to that list. Say, oh, I'm doing this thing and I want to know, if someone's using it. And then they can even follow, like, if we come up with a script that's good, people could use that for contrib modules and stuff too, and be like, oh, I just built this module and I want to know if people are using it the way I think they're using it.
I think, just spitballing here, things we want to test, but also sort of writing a script, right? It's like, I could implement a usability test in an hour if I had the script. That's the hard part. And just having like what needs to be tested isn't enough, right? You need a scenario because it has to make like a logical progression.
Yeah.
You can't just test something if you have to get by 5 other things unless you sort of stage a site, sometimes, which is one option, right? If you want to test something, but it requires that 5 things be implemented first, is that you just pre-implement those because you don't want to focus on that now. Anyway, so my point is that sort of getting a script together is probably the biggest blocker. And I would, one person could sit down and tackle that themselves. I would volunteer, but I probably wouldn't do it. I would, however, if we either set aside a meeting, like to do that, or if somebody else said they wanted to be on a subcommittee and we met separately, like 2 or 3 of us, and just like hammered out some scripts. That would force me to set aside the time, plus it would be valuable having somebody else's input.
I think I have some of the old scripts from the Drupal usability studies that might be a good starting and ending tool, but figuring out the scenario, you're right, is going to be the hardest part. Like, okay, here's the thing we want to test. What do we want to have them do? And then everything in the middle of that script would change based on what the task is, obviously. But yeah, I think that would be great too. I would also like to devote one of these meetings to doing that. I think that it's the kind of thing that I also feel inclined to volunteer for, but also worry that it wouldn't get done if I did. But if we had dedicated time, like maybe the next design usability meeting where, between now and then we create an issue, we come up with 4 things we want to test. I don't know, we decide on which one it is. And then during the meeting, we're like, okay, this is the one we're going to test. Let's write a script. And if we can get that done, we could even put the script in the forum and have people try it there, or have anyone in the forum if they want to try and do a study with a friend or neighbor or whatever. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. If we had the script, right, people could do it on their own and report back, or like I could just, I know, call somebody up, get them on a Zoom call and record it. And, if a couple of us each did that with one person, then we'd have, 5 or 6 examples to work with. And that's all it takes. I had the good fortune of participating in one of the high-level Drupal usability studies here in the Twin Cities in the usability lab. And I was blown away with how much feedback you can get from 3 users.
Yeah.
Right. Good usable feedback.
Yeah.
Didn't you create a couple of forum topics, a self-user study kind of thing? Yeah,
they weren't actually focused on the product. They were focused on, like, I called them community usability tests. So it was like you're curious about the security policies of Backdrop CMS. Can you find those?
Okay.
But the same thing could be done with the product, especially because we've got Tugboat, right? So we could create some short tests like that and say, go to Tugboat, spin up a site, and do X, and then tell us
issue queue too with the pull request sandboxes. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess it depends if we want to test it before or after we fix it, or both. But yeah, we got it.
I think the problem with that model is that we need, like, nobody's done the ones that I set up. And so sort of just putting them out there and just sort of casually hoping people do it is not probably going to work. We'd have to really work hard. And so, like, we could do usability testing frequently on new features, right? But it's the effort of getting people to do them. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Whereas, if we had a good, thorough sort of script, and we on a sort of one-time basis said, let's go get 5 people, that's a more achievable goal. And it's
I was also thinking, like, as we start doing this more, we might get more people participating too. But if there was something we could incentivize people to do it, like, if we can get 5 people to do this, we'll raffle off a stuffed dragon or something. I don't know what people want. PHP Storm license. I don't know.
A t-shirt, right? If you do a usability test, you get a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, for the really simple ones, that's probably too much. But actually, if somebody spent an hour doing a longer script with us, that's worth a t-shirt.
Yep.
Do we have the t-shirts for that?
We do right now. It depends how many people do this. If all of a sudden we get 100 people, we'll be like, yeah.
I would be willing to bet if we had a script and we tweeted out a free t-shirt to somebody who's never used Backdrop that will give us an hour to do an online usability test, that we'd have 20 people volunteer, and then, you know, we'd have the pressure on us to follow through.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that'd be good. I also think we should maybe do a little one first with like random people we recruit and make sure we know what we're doing. And if we get the process down and love it, I like the idea of incentivizing with a a tweet that there's a t-shirt, also known as a tweet-shirt. Yeah, I think that's great. And maybe we should put that down as a goal for 2020 to get there to the point where we can do that.
Sure.
And if it works, we can do it all the time.
Well, so you mentioned putting this on the agenda for this meeting in the future. In terms of planning, are there other topics like that? I mean, I think the agenda that we're doing is useful once in a while, but it's also useful to like set aside a meeting. And you know, every meeting could have the little, what are the hot topics in the issue queue that some people need to talk about, but we just wouldn't have to go through them all every time. But what are, you know, I think like focusing one upcoming design meeting on usability testing would be great. I'm wondering if there are other topics that could also use that attention.
I would love to bring in a designer and do something with a designer, like get somebody to commit to being here for an hour and throw stuff at them. But I think before we do that, we should have a list of things we need help with, whether it's on our own website or on Backdrop the product or whatever. And we can just go through and be like, we're having this problem on this page. What do you think? We're having this problem on this page. What do you think? And just kind of knock out a bunch of stuff. Because I know designers don't tend to hang out in the issue queue very often. And so posting issues with labels they're asking for help doesn't really work. Or at least works very slowly when it does work. And I think that if we could queue up a lot of stuff where we needed assistance and then get them, get their attention for an hour, that might be really useful. It might also be useful to do a designer usability study. And it wouldn't really be a usability study, just sort of a study where you're like, hey, you're a designer, this is Backdrop, what do you think? And have somebody who hasn't seen Backdrop before look at it through those lenses, where they're like, oh, hey, I can, you know, I see the power of this. I could totally design a thing for this. And if it seems like a tool that they'd be interested in using, or if there's something that initially puts them off, we could figure out what that is too. I don't know. It's also tough because in Drupal, there's this division of like the person who makes the design and the person who makes the theme and the person who makes the back end stuff. And I feel like in the rest of the world, those lines aren't so clear. So there are people who call themselves web designers who also build WordPress sites. And so they're pretty dev heavy. And there are people who call themselves developers that also dabble in design. And so I don't know, like, I feel like that's kind of more of where our audience is than the thing where there's like a dedicated job of just making themes at an agency that does that sort of thing, or just designing themes, what have you. But yeah, I don't know, maybe that would be a thing too, is to like reach out to our networks of people we know and say, hey, who do you know that's a web designer that doesn't already work with this? And let's get, you know, an interview. Who are you? What do you do? What are your skills? Would you use this tool? And try and figure out if we're hitting their needs or not. So.
Sure. I mean, so to me, it's obvious how that would work with like Backdrop and the .org and the forums. But again, I'm still a little bit unsure to show a Backdrop the product to a designer and say, what do you think? I don't even know what that means if our expectation is that everybody's going to change it anyways.
Yeah.
It's like, why do we care what a designer thinks of what it looks like out of the box?
It would be like not necessarily design, what does it look like out of the box, but like as a designer, does this look like a product you could use to give to your clients? So it would be more like an adoption interview than like a is it pretty enough interview. So it would be like, okay, here's a tool, would you use it? And so what does the designer look at with the tool they're evaluating, which might be very different from like, what does the API look like? Or what does the front end theme look like? Or can I change it to a theme that's pretty without coding?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just an idea. It might not be the best use of time, but it's something I'm curious about.
If the WordPress example you gave, like where a lot of people consider themselves website designers, but they build, for their clients, they build a WordPress site for them, right? So to take that model, like it would be really interesting to get somebody like that with that skill set and give them the usability test, which is, okay, go in and try and build a site like you would in WordPress, give them a very simple scenario, and then, yeah. So that's more, it's not a different test, it's just like a particular audience that we would want to test, right?
Yeah. I would also be really curious about watching their initial impression investigation, like where they'd be like, okay, maybe they play with demo and then they're like, oh, let me run it locally. And then they try and install it locally and seeing how that goes. And then be like, okay, I feel like I can use the back end. What does the theme look like? And have them look in a theme and see their initial reactions there too. Because I feel like that's sort of the path they might take, is like, let's try it somewhere else where there's no commitment. And then when you're sort of committed, then try it locally where you can fiddle with it. And now that you can fiddle with it, look at the files you're most likely to fiddle with and see if you can understand them. And if they open the theme and they're like, I don't get any of this, and like run screaming, we know that like that's the place that we have to work on things. Or if they get to the point where they like install it locally and they can't do that, then we can spend more time there. And neither of those things are things that we're thinking about right now, where we're like, does it I don't know, like we're way past that in terms of where we're fixing stuff. And if our blocker is before we get to the point where we're fixing stuff, then the stuff that we're fixing isn't really solving our biggest problems. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering about.
I raised this question before, and I don't know. Okay. I have this goal. Oh, okay. I'm being told my internet connection is unstable. So I have this goal that somebody should be able to, like say a designer, download Backdrop out of the box and configure it maybe with a contrib theme. It doesn't have to be Basis, but with nothing more than an available contrib theme, although ideally Basis. A lot of the modern websites, right, have these big blocks. So there's a hero image, there's a block with 3
I think we lost him.
Yeah, I think the internet is sufficiently unstable. This is a fantastic freeze frame of him though, where he's just frozen with the like, I don't know. See if he comes back.
I think I have a similar goal as he does. Not a set stated goal, is that I would like it to be easier to year-end design out of the box without having to be a coder, with or without a contrib theme. More things that one of the, like Joseph's been doing the work on the color module so much is because I've been like, this is broken, it needs to be fixed, and he's like, okay, I'll fix it. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. There's lots of other things that could be done to help improve that as well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see that too. And for me as a developer that wears all hats, I would like it to get farther before I need to get into the code. And I think that's the same kind of answer, where it's like, if somebody can get far enough where they're like, oh, that's close enough, that's
Right.
great. And for me, I'm like, oh, it's really close if only I could change these 3 things. And yeah, and I think that's also, if you can get somebody to that point, then they're like, oh, if I only need to change 3 things, then they might become coders.
Right. And maybe those 3 change. Maybe changing those 3 things would be simple enough to, but then maybe, maybe they wouldn't be. Maybe they require writing a module. But yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we've got some goals. We want to be able to do more usability studies and have a comprehensive one enough that we can incentivize with a t-shirt. We want Backdrop to be easier for people to affect the design without needing to be a coder. And we want Backdrop to be attractive enough so that the designer or web designer audience wants to adopt it. I don't know how to phrase that exactly. And we don't know what the answer to that question is. Like how to do that yet.
One thing that I've actually run into a couple times is explaining the path on when you're creating a new layout, explaining why you need to write node % in, like if you want like 3 different content types with different layouts and then have one look different based on your role or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you're going to make like 5 or 6 layouts and they're all going to say node % there, and explaining why that is to people is one of the
I think we have an issue about that from way back in the early days. The node % only makes sense if you're a developer and understand that it's a like hook menu key. It doesn't make any sense to any human being. I would love to see.
And like me, when I used it first time, that made perfect sense to me. I was like, oh yeah, node %, because that's actually the menu item that I'm trying to target here. So I don't know how to fix that.
I have an idea. I think that we could put like a little form element with some JavaScript on there so that we can put some human readable labels in there, like something say like, I want to customize a node template. And then you select that and it'll automatically throw node % into that box for you. You can say node, taxonomy, user, whatever. And then, or you could say other, and then it lets you type whatever you want into that box. And I think that would sort of help people train them that like this crazy node % thing matches to a node template or content or whatever we want to call it in the interface. But yeah, it's something that every time I do a training on it, I'm like, you're never going to remember what to put in this box. That's why it's in the description text. And I think that making that more intuitive is going to be really good for people.
Could it? In Drupal 8, they changed the field, the add a field thing, so that it has kind of more of a multi-step form. Could we do something like that where it's like, do you want a layout that's a standalone page or a layout that modifies an existing page kind of thing?
I like that.
Like ask you that first, and then it can change the elements on the page to be more helpful.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. Can you put some screenshots of what Drupal 8 does into an issue?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there's actually an issue to replicate that behavior in our field UI.
Okay, that's good. Field UI redesign issue as well. I can't find the one about node %. I don't know what it's called. That's okay. I'll look for it. But yeah, I want to write down what I just said somewhere. Okay. Well, I'm not sure we're going to get Tim back. It is the end of the hour. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up before we wrap this meeting? Design, usability, or otherwise?
I don't have anything.
Okay. I don't have anything either, so why don't we go ahead and end this meeting, and we will start up again in a few minutes on the regular weekly meeting agenda. Thanks for coming, everyone.